All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 DelDOT Lessons Learned Workshop. We are excited to present this training opportunity to you today to discuss some challenges that we have seen over the last year and some ways we can learn from them and improve upon our business practices. So I'm your host, John Cariano. You may remember me from such thing as the DelDOT Winter Workshop just 3 short weeks ago. So I'm back to run us through this other training. Today's session is going to last to about 3 o'clock, and tomorrow's session will start at 8 a.m. We'll be handling questions the same way we've done it in the past with the Q&A feature. If time permits and it allows for the presenter to answer audibly, we'll do that. Otherwise, they'll stick around and answer in the Q&A chat feature as they come in. We also have closed captioning available, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and you can select that and see the closed captioning as it pops up. We are recording. This presentation will be retained on the DRC as well as on the DelDOT YouTube page, so you can access it at a later time. And lastly, 2 more things, sorry. We're going to be utilizing polling again, similar to the other workshops. You may text in DelDOT to 22333 or go to pollev.com/DelDOT. or scan the QR code that was sent out with the agenda this morning from Sandy. And to receive any PDHs, we're going to send out an evaluation form at the close of business tomorrow. Please complete that by March 11th if you want to receive a PDH certificate. So I think that's it. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our Deputy Secretary and Chief Engineer, Shante Hastings, who's going to issue some opening remarks.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So good to be here with you. Excited to see over 200 participants chiming in to learn a little bit more about some different lessons that we've had over the last year. So I want to start off with some thank yous to all of you. You all play a role in the projects that we do, the work that we do, that we bring to people. So whether you're on the support section side of things, you all get the fun task of touching almost every project and helping it through the various regulatory and coordination processes that it takes, as well as assisting with some of the work once it's in construction and doing, whether it be materials inspection or regular inspections. You've got our design folks who are busy, making sure that the project gets scoped well and gets designed to the nth degree. And then our construction folks who really carry it forward and get everything in the ground so that it can be used by our customers. So I wanted to, just thank all of you. It takes a village, if you will, to deliver our projects and our program. And I appreciate what you do on behalf of the department. I wanted to share, I think sometimes we can lose sight of what we're doing and the impact that it has on people. So I got a text over the weekend from my former pastor who has moved up to the Smyrna area, and she was headed to Wilmington, unfortunately, to get the ashes of her dog that passed away recently. And I share that with you because, people are using transportation every day for a variety of different reasons. And she thought about us as she was making her journey up to Wilmington. So she said, I'm in Wilmington. I'm always amazed. I mean, literally amazed at what it takes to build roads and all the stuff that goes into them, the manpower, the woman power, the engineering, all of the little details that make a road a road. And she said, you're part of that. And so I think of you when I travel into different locations. And so, look, people are using our transportation system every day. Even if you don't leave your house, you're using our transportation system because that's how you get your mail delivered or how your Amazon comes or maybe your groceries are delivered. So transportation really is far-reaching and touches everybody, and what we do matters. And it can, transform our state and transform people's lives. So I thank you for what you do. I thank you for our crew from engineering support as well as tech and innovation for putting on this lessons learned workshop. It's always, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of corralling the team to make sure that we've got the presentations in hand, that people have done a quick run through to make sure they know what they're doing. And so I thank everyone that's been involved on that process. I wanted to talk really quickly about 3 things. First and foremost is safety. As you all know, we have just been experiencing a crazy amount of fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways in this year of 2022, and we've got to all do better. So I'm asking all of us and for us to tell our family and friends to do a few things to make sure that you buckle up, to make sure that you're watching your speed and going the speed limit. That's really important. It's been a cause of a lot of the bad crashes we've had recently, and to stay attentive. You know, I think the message boards today, it was like LOL and something else can wait, you know, until you get to your destination. So put your cell phones down, keep your eyes on the road, and make sure that you tell your friends and family members that as well. Second, I wanted to touch really quickly on the bipartisan infrastructure law. I know we've heard a lot about it a few different times, but I want to talk about what it means to each of you, depending on, you know, what your capacity is in terms of projects. The law focuses on a variety of different things, but the new highlights, I'll say, are equity, resiliency, and obviously safety, as I just mentioned. So the department will be getting approximately $100 million per year extra for the next 5 years, so $500 million. And I want to assure you, especially those in the support groups, I think there's some anxiety about what that means. So one, we're not doing a bunch of new projects. Our plan is to pull forward some projects that we're going to begin design, say, in 25 and 26, and be able to pull them forward to 23 to start that process a little bit earlier. Also, there are some new programs that will have new projects, you know, in the EV side of things, as well as some of the resiliency work. But a bulk of that funding is going to our normal formula program, both on the federal highway side of the house, as well as the federal transit side of the house. So I want to reassure you that we're thinking about what, you know, what those moves mean, what that extra money means. And I'm planning to have some meetings with everybody to see what the resource needs may be, so that we can make sure that we can deliver on that program. We've been asking for more money, and now we've got it, and so we need to make sure that we can deliver. And then the other thing is that we're looking at potential grant opportunities, and again, for those, we're taking projects that are already in the CTP. So it's not, oh, I had this great idea of a project that, you know, no one knows about, and I'm going to submit a grant for it or try and get funding for it. That's not our goal. We have plenty of needs that had been unfunded, and now we have some additional funding to be able to work with. So that's an exciting thing, and we want to make sure that we can deliver, because again, at the end of the day, we're focused on improving transportation for everyone within the state, as well as those who travel here. So lastly, I just want to encourage you to you know, have some key takeaways over the next couple of days. We as a department need to be focused on continuous improvement. And really learning from, whether it be, you can call them mistakes, or those missed opportunities that we may have had to do something a little bit differently. So you're going to hear from a variety of speakers. I hope that you'll take to heart some of the information. Obviously, we can, you know, change policies or design guidance to change, you know, change how we do certain things, but it's also a change in mindset. So how are we doing what we're doing? Is there a better way to do it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? Is there a better way to meet the needs of the community? Those are the things that we're focused on, and that I hope that you'll take away from these next 2 days. So thank you for making the time and being committed to providing excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and every one. And I look forward to seeing the presentations and getting some of those key takeaways so that we can continue improving transportation. So thanks. I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Shantae. So at this time, we're going to roll into our agenda. Mark Bucklew, DelDOT Chief of Construction and Materials, is here to present on ADA from a construction perspective.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So I was asked to do this presentation from engineering support. You know, construction will try to oblige everyone's wishes, but I was a little shocked engineering support asked me to do this. But you know, hey, we're here to work together and help them out. So this is ADA from a construction perspective. It's not, there we go. First off, my presentation's rated R, and I'm going to apologize for that. However, I thought it'd be proper that I kind of notify everyone that it is rated R. There's some graphic violence in my presentation. I'll kind of note when it's going to come, like the next slide. So if there's something that you're not really appreciative of, you can go ahead and log off. You won't hurt my feelings. We've been kicked around enough. We don't have too many feelings left in construction. So you'll be fine. You won't hurt my feelings. You can go ahead and log off. The video is about 3 minutes long, and it's towards the end. And there is some inferred strong language. I'm not going to cuss. I try not to cuss. So, but there is some inferred strong language in some of these that you may kind of think about. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. What is ADA? So ADA is Americans with Disability Act. The Americans with Disability Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment. And I underlined these next two pieces because they affect us, everyone in DelDOT. Transportation, public accommodations, that's us. And communications and access to state and local government. Delaware Department of Transportation, as Shantae noted, our vision is every trip, every mode, which I underlined, yes, I underlined, every mode, that means every mode of transportation, every dollar, and every one. This is very important. It's part of what we do. All of DelDOT, everybody in the same boat. The key to a successful pedestrian connection installation. Now, if you're sort of new to this, I said pedestrian connection. This is the new phrase we're calling it, the pedestrian connection instead of curb ramps. Curb ramps is a lot more brief, a lot more plain Jane, so to speak. Hey, Brian. And pedestrian connections is a lot more complex, and it's sort of, our curb ramps or pedestrian connections got a lot more complex. So it sort of fits with what's happening with these pedestrian connections. So some of the keys to successful installation, it starts with a proper scope. This is my most boring slide, so I'm going to apologize now for that. But I'm going to go over every one of these bullet points. Proper scope. First thing to do is look at the drainage, do a full review of the drainage, and if you need to alter some grades in order to hit the proper drainage for positive drainage on a curb ramp, maybe look at some grade alterations, see how far you need to go to get positive drainage so you can expand your scope accordingly. We have to make sure all the pedestrian connections are addressed. We don't want to finish a curb ramp that leads to nowhere. We have to have a positive pedestrian connection. So again, if you need to expand the scope, now's the time to do that. And of course, obstructions, we need to make sure we address any obstructions along the pedestrian pathway. Now, once it gets into design, design has a very important step here, that they design the proper pedestrian connection type. They want to look and make sure that there's feasible grades for positive drainage, that we can obtain positive drainage on a curb ramp, that it's obtainable. They want to make sure that they address any obstructions. And if there's any curb ramp that's really complicated and impossible for us to get ADA acceptance, then we need to make sure that they fill out that request for practical exemption, that RPE. If they can fill out that RPE in design phase, pass that on to construction, we can load that into our field documents so we know which ramp it is, and know that it's okay not to build that particular ramp to get ADA compliance. And then it goes into construction. And yes, it is our responsibility to make sure we provide proper drainage. And again, it helps if the previous steps are done, make sure we have positive drainage, make sure we're all on the same page. Again, in construction, we're going to have to make sure we have pedestrian connections are addressed, that our slopes don't exceed the maximum allowable per the past manual, and to make sure we address any of the obstructions or barriers along the pedestrian pathway. Some common misconceptions about construction, and I've heard, I'm not calling anybody out. I've heard these comments over the years. I kind of want to address some of these to kind of put some of those misconceptions to rest. Construction just doesn't pay attention to the finer details of curb ramp construction. It's not quite true. There's a lot of difficulties in building some of these ramps, and I'll get into some of that. A lot of it has to do with the material we use, the equipment we have to use to place it. And if construction did a better job managing these projects, it would save time, effort, and money. Again, I don't find this to be true at all. There's some really meticulous elevations we're trying to hit, and it's really difficult with some of the equipment we have and the materials. And the last one is construction just doesn't care about ADA. I believe that to be patently false, because I know the people I work with, and we do care about ADA facilities. It's just some of the difficulties we have constructing them sort of make it frustrating at times. So I'm not sure how many of you had the pleasure of reviewing an ADA inspection report, but this is what one looks like. You see, this is multiple locations. So each one of these lines is basically one curb ramp. So as you can see, there's a lot of measurements that are taken along an ADA pathway. All these measurements are important, and if any of them exceeded an allowable slope or exceed has a feature that does not permit an accessible pedestrian pathway, we're going to fail. As you can see in this top line, we have a height of a ½ an inch, so it's not technically compliant. We had to go back out and address these issues. Anything that, right here, this is the line we really look for. This is the line that kind of tells us whether or not we have to do anything on each particular curb ramp. And this is just one page out of many for this particular ADA inspection report. Some of our acceptance issues, I plan on going through some of these struggles that we have in construction to kind of just call out some of the things that we see so we can kind of all get on the same page. On the left here is a PAR project that was finished on Kirkwood Highway. And when we got done, we were dinged here for ponding water here in this intersection. Again, with the ADA report called it out because it's along the pedestrian pathway. This was a quote unquote sump, and construction really had a hard time with this. Now, this was basically a pavement rehab project. So there's no grades on a pavement rehab project. It's really mill to put back to, except sometimes we'll have grades along the curb ramp themselves to kind of help us provide positive drainage across the pedestrian pathway. When we look back in sort of the Google Earth history, we noticed that there was already an existing ponding issue here at this intersection. So when we milled to and put back to, all we did was put the problem back in the same spot. But it kind of got flipped to construction to kind of take care of this, which we did. Kind of had to mill and pave this again to kind of push this water out to along the curb line to get some positive drainage. ADA acceptance issues, construction feasibility. I believe everybody who's watching this right now knows what this piece of equipment is. It's a roller. It's a hot mix roller. So it's really necessary in order to compact the hot mix properly. This is a big part of our struggle to hit some of the minute grades that are required for ADA curb ramp construction. And I will be referring to this piece of equipment quite often here. So I believe all of you know what this is. So I won't beat this issue up too much. Here's an example, and I try to keep these examples that I have. I'm not calling anybody out, so the locations are covered up to protect the innocent. But here's a location where this curb ramp was detailed out, and these are grades. You see, these are grades in the hot mix in the shoulder of the pavement. I sort of covered up the sidewalk. Those grades on the sidewalk a little easier to hit with concrete because you're finishing it, but these are grades shown in hot mix. So this is, as you can see, some of these grades are 0.6%, 0.6%, 1.1%, 0.5, 0.3, and as you go out sort of on the radius, the slopes change. Even if we placed the hot mix and hit all of these slopes, and I'm gonna go back one, by the time this huge roller hits it, all of these grades pretty much get mashed in together to be some other percentage that we don't really know what's going to be. But we cannot hit these grades using a roller, which is sort of a difficulty here. This curb ramp actually ended up holding water a little bit right in here, and we had to do a patch in order to force the water around this radius, which is what the original intent of the drawings was. So when we see something like this, I've talked to some other people, some other prominent figures around and trying to get their opinion on some of our struggles. And I asked Mr. Johnson, and his response was, come on, man, like we can't build something like that, hitting those slopes and then hit it with a hot mix roller. So Mr. Johnson even agreed that it's not feasible. The next piece I have here is, this is an integral curb and gutter. The top left photo, there's a lot going on here, so I'll try to break it down. The top left photo here is of an integral curb and gutter per the past standards. The back of curb, noted as K on our ADA inspection report, has a maximum slope of 8.3%. The L of the pan part of the curb is noted as maximum slope there is 5%. Now we had a situation come up. I'll keep this person, I'll protect this person's name at the time for this, so that way nobody goes back after them. But they had a curb ramp here with an integral curb and gutter, and it shows a 5.6% here on the back curb, and that on the pan, it was 7.1%. Now, the interesting thing with this one is If the 7.1 and the 5.6 were flipped, we would pretty much be compliant with this one, because the 5.6, close to the 5% here, and the 7.1 would be below the 8.3. So the K plus L passes, but what failed here was the 7.1. Now you can say, Mr. Buckaloo, 7% is pretty excessive when the maximum's 5. And I agree with you, 7% seems excessive. But when you actually run the numbers, this 7.1% over 23 inches, you're talking a half inch. It's actually less than a half inch here. So again, when you're trying to finish this concrete and pave this, when you're matching with your pavement, it's really hard to hit those minimal percents with the materials that we're using and the field conditions we're trying to deal with. The next one I'll talk to is the vertical difference. This is a big one on ADA inspection reports. When we pull our smart level across, utility valves, we'll be able to hit the edge of this valve casing with the roller, so this will be flush. But the problem is the cap itself sits inside of that ring, that gas valve ring, and it sits down more than a 1/4 inch. So what happens is when we have a gas valve that's along a pedestrian pathway, we end up failing those. There's not much we can really do because we don't own the gas valve. We don't spec out that gas valve. That's a gas company. But so these end up failing. And the other big issue that we see is this: we end up having we exceed a 1/4 inch here against the curb when we're paving. Now remember that big roller I showed you. When that roller hits this, we don't really want the roller coming over on the concrete because it'll end up cracking it up and we'll fail for that. But sometimes it's really difficult to get that roller rolling right over across here to meet that 1/4 inch height difference, the maximum 1/4 inch height difference. So again, when I'll go back to that quote that construction doesn't pay attention to the finer details, it's not really the case. It's hard to do with some materials we have and some of the equipment we have to use. That roller isn't something it's a real finite piece of equipment to hit those grades. So again, I asked some other people, prominent figures, what they thought of some of these issues that we have and maybe what we can do. And I asked Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter said, "Come on, man." Now, this is the same Chris Carter that the Eagles got rid of because all he could do was catch touchdowns. So they didn't really want him anymore. They got rid of him. But I like Mr. Carter. I think he's very entertaining, very opinionated. So I like him. I agree with Mr. Carter. Come on, man. It's hard for us to hit some of those elevations with some of the parameters we're dealing with. Some of the other acceptance issues that we have for existing obstruction is scoping. Here's a location in the city of Wilmington. Now, this pole is older than me, and somewhere along the line, they came out and attached a signal cabinet to it with straps, and it's been there for a while. But we failed this curb ramp because, again, this conflicts with the pedestrian pathway here. It's not something that construction created, but it fell into our court to remedy this signal cabinet and this pole. In order to get acceptance and accept the project. Some of our other issues are this horizontal gap with an existing ramp. Now, during construction, we were told, do not disturb this ramp. We have the little DND insignia on our plans, which means don't touch this ramp. It's fine. But when they came out to do the ADA inspection, we had our horizontal gap exceeded a half inch. This is like a 3 or 4 inch gap here. We had to fill this in with grout in order to get compliance. And the lower one, this one's ours. This is our issue, but as you can see, it's pretty close to half inch, but we had to shrink it up, so it's less than a 1/4 inch gap. So this had to get filled in with grout. This is my favorite. Now we're gonna move on to my favorite, the ADA acceptance issues with sumps. Now, if you look at this, it looks bad, and I agree with you. This looks bad. This looks like a terrible sump. And I'm not gonna tell you whose job this was, but I called up Jay. I said, "What happened here, Jay?" He said, "Mark, it's not as bad as it seemed." So when you look at this, Jay went out at 7 p.m. to get some photos. It was raining, so you see what's going on here. There was some sediment noted here, which is why it was called out as appears to be a sump. There's some sediment sitting right here. So when Jay went out during the rain event, he notices this thing's kind of underwater, and I kind of see the issues here. But when he went out the next day, he saw this thing's perfectly dry. what we have here is the slope of 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.2%, 0.2%. We have a flat curb ramp across here. What happens is runoff comes off of the road at a higher slope, steeper slope, and it picks up sediment. And once it hits these curb ramps, it flattens out. And when it flattens out, it deposits that sediment in the curb ramps generally. And we end up having an accumulation of sediment. And what generally happens is sediment builds up and then it does start holding water. But this isn't really a contract issue that the contract didn't build it properly. They did build it properly. It's just we're going to end up holding water because of the sediment in these flat curb ramps. But again, this is what we have to deal with here. Now, my next slide is a video. It's about 2 minutes long. There is some graphic violence on it. So if you like to log off, feel free. Just come back in like 2 or 3 minutes. I recognize it's lunch, probably poor timing on my part to show a video like this during lunch. But I feel it's sort of necessary to understand what we have to kind of go through with these curb ramps. Sorry. So to gain an ADA acceptance, it feels like we have to go through a gauntlet of issues. And it's constantly battling each one of these problems one by one. Oh, let me hang on a second. I had to silence that. I don't want people to hear. So again, when we have these curb ramps, in order to get acceptance, it feels like we have to go through a gauntlet of issues. Now, usually we're waiting for the ADA report. And it's like, oh, I just don't know what to expect. And then the gates open and we get the report in hand, and generally the first person out of the gate takes it on the chin. But we go rushing out to try and figure out which problems are which. It's kind of tough to get our bearings. We have to understand which curb ramp problems refer to which curb ramps, because there's a lot of locations on a lot of these. And generally you have, Don's asking when you're going to finish. You got finance yelling when you're going to finish. Got to get the project acceptance so we can not have to use state funds, but really got to tackle each issue one by one. So your vertical differences, your horizontal differences. And through all of this, it's really important that we stick together through this. We don't want to throw anybody under the bus. It's really important that, because we need help from design to gain compliance, and design really comes in and helps us out. But it's important that we all just stick together. We don't lose anybody through this. It's really a team effort. Again, it's trying to tackle issue by issue, and some of them take time. And it's where people start getting excited. We're getting done, getting some of these issues tackled. Of course, not all of us survive. Some of us take it on the chin, and things aren't done properly. But we'll take every single issue and get them all corrected on each ADA report. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here because Don told me don't keep going on. It's a little too long. My last slide, if I can get it to go. There we go. Last slide is I was driving home from the viaduct one couple evenings during rush hour. It's going southbound in US 13, and I noticed some people walking in this right lane. And this is not a shoulder, this is a right lane. This is a hot lane here. And I noticed a woman pushing a stroller in the grass, and I didn't quite know where they were going. The sidewalk ends behind me, behind this photo here, it ends. And I saw a woman pushing a stroller down in the grass. I didn't really know where they were going. So I got up a little further and I saw a group of people standing, and there's a bus stop located right up here and further up the road. Part of my struggle with this, and construction struggle with this, is we spend 90% of our time focused on this, and we're missing this. And this is the reason for ADA, and these are the locations we really need to address to really provide ADA accommodations to everyone. And this is every mode, everyone, right? So this was the location that really needs to get taken care of. And construction is gonna work with project development and probably get this location added on to an existing project up north. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Appreciate everyone's time. I hope everyone can stick around this afternoon. We have some phenomenal presenters on some great topics, and I hope everybody can stick around this afternoon and tomorrow morning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. That was a very interesting perspective. I don't think we have any questions at this time, but if you just monitor the chat in case anything does pop in. That'd be appreciated. So with that, we are going to move on to Jen Pinkerton, who's responsible for our materials and research section, and she's here to provide us with some updates on project coordination with an M&R perspective.
Good afternoon, everybody. As John said, I'm Jennifer Pinkerton, just here to give you a few updates on what's going on in the Materials and Research Laboratory. And just a little plug for anybody who's interested, we're always welcome to giving tours of our laboratory, so just feel free to reach out to me, whether that's just on a one-on-one as an individual, or if perhaps your group is interested, maybe haven't visited our area and aren't familiar with what we do, we're happy to walk you through and show you the work that we do with all of our group. With that, let's see. There we go. All right, the first polling question. Why are you attending this workshop? All right. Very good. It's like that's slowing down now. Good. Jordan, you're saying increase my knowledge. And those that are truthful come in about the other third or so. All right, next question. What type of virtual meeting attendee are you? Interesting. Right. Very good. Looks like that's about even. About half people are always with the camera off. All right. Moving on. See. All right, our first topic is a common one that most designers are having to deal with at some point, usually early on in the project. This is the request for pavement cores and or pavement design, depending on the scope of your project. So initially, you'll want to send all requests to our pavement design engineer. That's Robin Davis. Please make sure when you send it, I put her full email address. It's Robin M. Davis. Otherwise, it'll go to the Department of Corrections. When you're sending your request, please include a Google map or something equivalent of the site with locations marked. If you send us a plan set marked out, it is much more difficult for our field staff to read and review exactly where it is. It's much clearer on a visual if it's on like a Google map, because they can correlate it to the actual location in the field, see where a mailbox is or a tree or something along those lines. So it's much better of a visible indicator for them. Please also make sure you're explaining the reason for why you want the cores and what you're trying to find or get the information for. If the field crew knows what the reason is for the coring, then as they find different things in the field, different conditions, they can make adjustments and move around and use their experience to help make sure that they get you all the information they need. And if they can't, they can give a call, maybe while they're even out in the field. Please also let us know if you did want to attend. We're always happy to have you come out in the field with us. And if we're able to make those kind of coordinated efforts, we're happy to do that. For the pavement design, when you're also requesting that information, make sure you're providing any special conditions that might be out there. We've had a couple projects recently where typically when we're doing design, we're basing that off of the traffic counts and the truck volumes and those sorts of things. And there may be something isolated that we weren't aware of. We had one issue where there was a plant nearby that had a lot of heavy truck usage in a particular turn lane, and that we weren't aware of. So when it got designed, a mix that wasn't really suitable for that got placed, and it failed pretty quickly. So if you have some special conditions like that, please call them out to us during the request stages so that way we can work with you to make sure that we're designing it appropriately for that particular site. Moving on to geotech. Designers, for borings that are being conducted in-house, M&R has its own consultants that will perform all the soil borings. Please make sure that your requests include any of the special conditions similar to the roadway corings or permits that might be required. This could include environmental issues that we need to be sensitive to. If there's wetlands that we need to get permits for, or that permits are already in process, is there hazardous material on site? Anything like that we may need to be aware of, please let us know during the request stage so that we're making sure we're coordinating that with our boring crews as well as with you, the designer. The boring request form is out on the DRC. It's pretty straightforward Excel format, so you can fill it out. If you have any questions, let us know and we can help you fill that out. In addition, for folks that are internal, a sample request form and the timeline guidance on how long it's going to take for us to typically drill as well as process all the samples in our laboratory can be found on the G Drive, and you can look that up and share that as well. Haney Fekri is our geotechnical engineer, and Aaron Wazorek is our soils lab manager. And you can reach them at those email addresses. And again, if you have any questions as you're filling out the forms or putting together your request, if you have new engineers that are being trained up, they're happy to sit with you and go through the information that they need and to help with any training that may be necessary on the geotech side. We also are working currently on revising our materials manual, and just as something to be aware of, there will be some updated guidance in the materials manual for consultant managed geotechnical investigations. And the reason that we're looking to do that is that we want to make sure that as the jobs come in, that there's a lot of consistency with them. And so the data can be reused from project to project. So we're initially going to try to make sure that each of these projects, the request or the proposal, is also reviewed by Haney and Aaron when that comes in. So anytime a PM receives that from their consultant, please get that to Haney to review as soon as possible. And he and Aaron can go over it and provide back any feedback or comments. Again, I already stated this, but just that there's consistency in the data and the boring logs from project to project so that the data is useful long-term. And this ties into the next item, which is to continue to maintain a good historical record. There's a lot of times where we repeat and come back to a certain area. We can pull existing boring records and provide that to a designer. And if they have confidence that we have good historical records, it may also allow us to move the project along more quickly. Perhaps they don't have to drill at all, or maybe their drilling can be pared down a bit and be more efficient in that manner. We also want to make sure that the testing that's being performed is by an accredited lab using AASHTO classifications. We see many third-party labs that are not always AASHTO accredited, so or using AASHTO classifications, and that's very important, again, for design purposes and for long-term consistency in our data. And one thing for everyone just to kind of keep an eye out for, and I know for the designers, this may not always be what you're thinking about when you're initially looking at it, but soil boring data is not just for design, but for construction too. So sometimes it may seem that perhaps materials and research is asking you to go and do additional classifications and take more samples than perhaps you feel you need during the design stage. But I can tell you from our experience that if there's a problem out in the field or they find something unexpected, we often are then pulling the boring logs and looking at the data that we already have. And if we don't have to go back and do additional testing and additional borings, it can save a tremendous amount of time to have that data up front. And that's why we often are sampling as frequently as we do and test as many samples as we do. All right, moving on to hot mix. Just wanted to give kudos to all of the field staff. Our plant inspectors have reported some much improved communications between themselves and the field inspectors. And so we want to continue to build on this going forward. During a few of the comments they still had was during inclement and cold weather, they would like to hear from you as close to the release time as possible, so that way, if there's changes in the field, if there's temperatures, if you're 30 and rising or 28 and rising, and you're calling at at 8 a.m., but you're not really going to release or need the material until closer to noon. If you're able to and logistics work out, try to wait until 11 or so to call, just somewhere closer, so that way, as our staff are documenting the field conditions, it's closer to what it's really going to be out there. Please let our hot mix plant inspectors also know if there's any special circumstances going on. We, as materials and research, do not issue waivers, for temperatures, things like that. That's a field call with your project manager or your area engineer to discuss whether that's a reasonable request to entertain from the contractor. So but that is information that materials and research will need. So if you know that in advance, a lot of construction maintenance has been doing a really good job of this year. If you know in advance that you are going to be waiving temperatures, please contact, and I've got their information here, Shane Biddle, who is our hot mix supervisor, or Mark Schaefer, who's our assistant hot mix supervisor, or myself, and just give them a heads up, so that way it makes it a lot easier. Our plant inspector then isn't needing to ask as many questions, because those things have already been answered. Moving on, also, so you're aware, when our plant inspectors are inspecting the mix, in addition, they're also keeping essentially a backup record for the field. So if there's any questions about what's going on, they're able to record some of the existing conditions, the temperatures, time, and again, waivers, just to have that as backup. So if you ever need to check into records, or if there's a conflict, you can always reach out to us to look for some additional documentation. We are also tracking contractors that are not placing orders correctly. We have this pop up every once in a while. And so if we consistently are seeing the same contractors not placing their orders by 3 p.m. on the day prior to shipping, we'll start reaching out to the project managers to work with those contractors to get them back to ordering on time, because if they don't put in their orders on time, we're not going to have a plant inspector set up in time to go the following day. And please also make sure you're turning in your exempt sheets in a timely manner. If you don't, and we send automatically out something with zero pay, only to have to redo it, it just it doesn't make that process very efficient, and it wastes time on our side and on the field side. All right, moving on to concrete. Just a heads up, many of you have seen this, but it's not been on all projects at this point by any means yet, but we have 2 companies who are now approved sources that have mobile mixers. One is GFP and the other is Curbs, etc. They're pretty much able to supply most mixes except Class D right now at this point. But if you have them showing up as a source on your project, they have been approved as sources for a good majority of the mixes. If you have any specialized mixes that are not made at the plant, I have a couple examples there, like the ultra high performance concrete, grouts, et cetera. For any maintenance or construction staff, please make sure your inspector is reaching out to the lab directly to get inspection set up. We otherwise will not know when that's getting ready to be placed. Our folks call the lab or the plants daily, but if these mixes, which are not being made at the plants, are not going to be part of those orders that come in, so we really need field staff to make sure they're giving us a heads up and a call when these kind of projects are happening. And typically they're picked up at like a pre-pour and those kind of meetings, but every once in a while there's a mix like this that might not be on our radar. So please make sure you're reaching out. We do have some new supervisors in this group. So if you haven't met them yet or run into them in the field, Brian Johnson is the concrete supervisor and Danny Fedorov is the assistant concrete supervisor. So you can reach out to either of them for any support on issues that you have. In addition, we have a new precast supervisor. His name is Ray Morris, and you can reach out to him for any of the inspection needs. We handle in-house a number of inspections for precast, and Ray is also responsible for any of the pipe video van requests that we perform in-house. So I put his contact information there as well. And with that, I'm all done, John. If there's any questions.
All right. Currently, there's no questions in the Q&A, but if anything comes up, I invite the audience to submit it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thanks.
All right. So next we have a tandem to present on PD South's use of open-end contracts. Brian Behrens and John Gaines, Group Engineers and Project Development South, will highlight the projects completed and some lessons learned using this type of contract mechanism.
Thanks, John. You got us?
Yes, sir.
Is Brian on here too?
Yep.
Well, yep.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Like John said, we were tasked with delivering a handful of smaller projects throughout Kent and Sussex County. They weren't really large enough to advertise as standalone projects. So we went through the open-end project process. I think initially we started out with 6 locations. I can't get the screen to advance, John.
Yeah,
All right.
just a delay.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it didn't jump forward like 3 since I hit it several times. So we started out with this initial 6 locations. This grew to 14 locations throughout the life of the contract. The ones in yellow here are still in the design process, and due to issues that we'll discuss later, they are being advertised location 1 and 2 as a standalone contract, and 9, 10, and 14 as well. Guess there's still a delay. Do you have control of it, Brian?
No, I don't.
Oh,
There
here
we
we go. Okay, so the first location is on Route 1, where Hudson Steamboat comes out and intersecting Route 1. Currently, all movements are available from SR1 and from the side streets, which is causing some bad accidents. So our proposal is to come in and channelize the median, providing left turns from SR1, and the side roads would have to be left in, right out. Like I said, this one's still in design, and we're going to bundle it with location 2 and hopefully deliver those. Well, we have to wait and see how things go at 1 and 16. This we're calling location 1A is at Route 1 and Cave Neck Road. As you can see, all the movements are there as well. The maintenance had come in and blocked off the southbound left turn lane with flexible delineators, but we all know how those work. So the goal was to get that removed and then to extend the northbound left turn lane, which you see here. I'd like to thank Josh McCloskey and his crew of drone flyers for all these as-built pictures. As you can see, the median's been channelized, the southbound left was removed, side road was channelized, and on the picture on the right, you can see that left turn lane is now, that's like 600 feet longer than it was. Let's see, location 2, this is at Route 1 and Eagle Crest / Oyster Rocks. Again, this is an intersection with full access. And the proposal here is to remove the Route 1 access to turn left and provide left turn acceleration lanes for the side roads. And in between these locations, we're also removing quite a few median crossovers and expanding one for U-turns. Let's see, location 3 is at SR1 and SR5 coming out of Milton. Again, you can see here all the movements are available, which causes confusion and accidents. And this one is built. We took out the access from SR1 to the side road and channelized Route 5, channelized the median, and provided an acceleration lane.
All right, so the next location we have is at US 113 and Wood Branch Road. So this one actually has a little bit of history to it. It was a former capital project location, US 113 and Almshouse Kruger, and it had quite a bit of public opposition to the project, mainly from some local farmers who were worried that they couldn't get from one side of 113 to the other. So it went through quite a few different changes over the years. You can go to the next slide, John. This was kind of the original existing condition back when we had the capital project, and it was two intersections very close together that really had full access. And we saw a lot of bad accidents from people just basically trying to get from one side of 113 to the other. So from the time that started up to about 2014, that's when a lot of that public opposition occurred. We had some bad accidents, some fatals in 2014 that necessitated the department to move forward with basically shutting down the median. So you can go to that next slide. And we put in the flexible delineators and really restricted that movement to go from one side of 113 to the other as a result of those accidents. And then I think part of that negotiation or compromise was we would look to install a signal, which is what we ended up doing in between 2016 and 2017. So go to the next slide, and that shows the existing condition that we were left to work with. There was a signal that was built at the Wood Branch Road intersection, and the other intersection was basically closed off with those flexi posts. So what this project aimed to do was to kind of formalize that. The intersection at Wood Branch still remains with the signal, and we extended the left turn lane. It more than doubled the size of that turn pocket, and it kind of cleaned up the median there in between those two intersections. You can go to the next slide to show the length of that turn lane. It kind of extended past Speedway Road there too. So good project. This was one of the first ones that went out and got constructed under the original open-end contract that we'll talk about later.
Okay, location 5 was here in Dover. It's on Route 13 where Webb's Lane comes out. As you can see here, there's no right turn lane to go from Webb's Lane to head north. This used to back up the through lane constantly. So we came in and added an actual right turn lane, which came out very nice. This, like Brian said, the locations 3, 4, and 5 were the ones that were actually advertised with the contract. We'll talk more about that later.
So location 6 is at the intersection of US 113 and SR 24 in Millsboro, right by the Wawa. And that was kind of how we affectionately called it, was the SR 24 Wawa project. This actually came out of the US 113 North-South study as an interim or spot improvement to look to install a right turn lane. But the actual project was to look to provide enough width there for 2 trucks to get by each other. So could you go to the next slide? This is the existing condition, and the traffic going east is what you see backed up there, but it was really kind of dependent upon which time of day. And early in the morning and in the afternoon, what you would actually see frequently happen was cars and trucks turning into the Wawa and traffic not being able to get around them. So it would back up to US 113, which causes significant operational issues at an already very busy intersection. So next slide would show, this was our design file to show that 2 trucks, 2 WB67s, which are the largest trucks that we designed for, they can go by one another with this project. And then passenger cars as well, which is the more likely movement. But we did want to demonstrate that 2 trucks could get by one another. And then the next slide shows the final improvements. This was built, it opened just before the summer season last year. And by all indications, seems to be a success. The right turn lane is popular, but the actual real benefit there is the width on the westbound movement, the through lane movement. For anyone wanting to turn left into that Wawa, cars are able to pass them to to flush out that intersection at US 113 and 24. Another interesting part of this project was that it included a right-of-way acquisition phase, which is really different from most of these other open-end locations. Most of them don't involve, either significant utility relocations or right-of-way acquisition, but this one did, and we had to get right-of-way, which ended up, I think, being donated from the Wawa on this project. So good project all around.
Let's see, location 7 is here in Dover as well. It's on Route 10 where Sorghum Mill ties in. This was the existing condition. It was already channelized, but the left turn lane would back up into the left through lane at peak hours. So we came in and extended the left turn lane as far as we could. That's probably another 300 or 400 feet of storage.
So the next project we had is at US 113 and Redden Road. This was location 8 that we tracked it under. So Redden Road really is not the secret, cut through anymore. A lot of it, it's a very busy road, especially in the summertime, as an alternative to Route 404 for the traffic coming from the Bay Bridge to the beaches. And on the other side of Redden Road, we built a left turn lane extension onto Redden Road and then acceleration lanes from Redden Road onto 113 in the Georgetown area back in 2018. So this was, the other side of things basically. So this turn lane, this left turn pocket has a lot of demand now. So this was, we ended up going through a pavement rehab contract to do this one. Go to the next slide. This one shows the existing conditions. And this one didn't have any right of way or any utility kind of relocations. We did have some minimal traffic items to relocate. The next slide shows the finished condition, and the turn lane pocket there really about doubled in length, which is a significant improvement. And this one I think was open just after Memorial Day, open for the majority of the summer season. Okay, so the next one I'm going to show you is a bundle. This is the one that John referred to. We have a coastal highway intersection improvements project. This is 3 locations that will get advertised together. And the reason that we did this is they're kind of different. These projects were a little bit different in nature. They're all pretty close to one another. This picture here is of 5 Points like 75 years ago, I think from 1950, just to kind of show you how far things have come. But we tracked these originally under the open-end program. So the first project that we have is at SR1 and 5 Points. So if you could go to the next slide. This, I'm sorry, this is a general, this is kind of, you can see how closely spaced these are. These are the 3 locations under this contract. Okay, next one. So this project really is a breakout of the overall SR1 and Minus Conaway grade separation project that is in the right-of-way acquisition phase. It's close to moving towards construction. And that project, as part of the scope of that project, is really to kind of remove all of the crossovers on SR1, which are really the contributing factor to the safety and the crash pattern that's out there, and that project hopes to fix. So this is an early action part of that. So this will allow U-turns at 5 Points for the left turn southbound onto northbound movement. So today, for anyone who wants to make that movement, they actually have to go through 5 Points and make a left onto Savannah Road and then use the at grade loop to then come back around and access northbound SR1. So we're going to allow the left turn movement, or the U-turn movement, excuse me. And in order to do that, we have to rebuild some of the pork chop island on Savannah Road. And then while we're there, we're going to build the auxiliary / merge lane that will be part of the decel lane for the off ramps associated with the grade separation project. So it does have this is the one that does have a little bit of a time factor to it. We want this to be done before we start construction on the overall Minus Conaway project. The next location is further down Coastal Highway, further south. It's at SR1 in Kings. So this is born out of some bad fatal bicycle accidents at this location, and looking to tighten up the radii for the right turn onto Kings Highway. So traffic moving northbound on SR1 entering onto Kings Highway. That's the movement there that we're trying to slow down. And then we'll also kind of clean up some of the pedestrian and bicycle connections in this area. Next location. And this next one is a bit of a new one. So we're adding this. So the previous two have already been through a design effort with our support sections, but this one is just kind of in that phase right now. So a little bit further south from Kings, this is where the Walmart shopping center is on Coastal Highway in Lewis. And what's going on here is there's a double left turn lane on the northbound SR1 side turning into Rehoboth Mall Boulevard. And those don't get used there, nearly enough. There is not a demand for a double left turn lane there. So we're going to try to repurpose the median and extend the left turn U-turn movement for southbound SR1 because there is a demand there. And so that's what this project will hope to achieve. It'll more than double the length of that U-turn movement, which can we see significant stacking, at the peak hours there. So that project, they'll all be bundled together and advertised. And they are working through that process right now.
Let's see, the next location was actually a bridge project. This is bridge 3-155 over the Broadkill, which is currently under construction. They asked that we facilitate the median crossovers for the contraflow for these bridge closures. This one went out pretty early. The picture doesn't really show the median crossovers real well, but it just showed that we were helping our friends over in Bridge. Location 12 was actually a CTF project for a legislator. It's on Robinson Road down in Rehoboth. It was a resurfacing and sidewalk installation. So that one was completely out of our wheelhouse, but it was run through this contract.
Okay, location 13 was at US 9 and Minus Conaway Road. So this is a CTP project. I think begins PE funding either next year or the year after. So where this one kind of got started was, again, with the SR1 and Minus Conaway grade separation project. This Minus Conaway Road will be a detour route. And we know that there may be some significant demand on the right turn movement there to get onto 9. And then there was a pavement rehab that was going to resurface Minus Conaway Road there. So we were looking at opportunities to try to knock out, to basically install a right turn lane. And hopefully the hope is that we can knock out the future capital project with this one. So the next slide shows the existing condition there. The screen's kind of flipped. And what we did here was we really just used the right of way that already existed that was dedicated from the subdivision. So you can see the hammerhead entrance there and the sidewalk. And we really just used that space to put in the right turn lane. So we did not need to acquire right of way for this project. The next slide shows the finished or almost finished condition. This opened just last month or in January, I believe. And I think final paving is still to be done on Minus Conaway Road, and they'll finish the paving here on the right turn lane. But it is open and everything looks to be working quite well.
So I guess we kind of buzzed through those pretty quick, but this is the list of the contract numbers or the contracts that we ended up. This was all supposed to be done under the one contract, the initial one at the top. As we added these other locations with all state funds, the second one here was created. I did not name that one. That came from finance. So that was created just so we could run locations through the original contract, but it would be tracked separately in finance since it was state funds only. Then, like Brian said, several of the locations ended up being built under pavement rehab contracts. And then the last two are the bundles that Brian and my group are working on now. So those will be coming out probably in the next year or so. I think I touched on most of the finance bits, but as the financing kept changing from not only from federal to state only, but there's different funding for NHS versus local roadways. So as we're working through all that with Federal Highways, they eventually just shut they were not going to participate any longer due to the mixing of so many different funding sources, which was the first step of the demise on this contract. The second piece, the top excerpt here is from the original contract. And though it does say roadway projects throughout Kent and Sussex counties by the assignment of tasks, we thought that was enough to be able to add additional locations to the contract. But since we stated 124 calendar days, and we don't really say anything under that completion time section, that we would add time as locations were added to the contract. So working with Federal Highways, contract administration proposed this addition in the bottom excerpt here to show that we would be adding calendar days. And this was the second hole in the boat, that between the financing and the timing, completion time for the contract, the feds were no longer going to participate. So those were the two lessons learned for us. Obviously, the department uses open-end contracts all the time, but this was Brian and my first experience trying to do one from a project development perspective. So I'm hoping that we don't have to do this again. Brian, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, that was good. I just want to say, just a thank you really, because these were all the sections that really had to come together to get all of these built, because most of these are built and were done, pretty quickly. When you think about our overall program, they can take years. They do take years, and our projects lately seem like they're so big and large and complex that it was, it was kind of refreshing, I think, for our group to work on some of these ones that we know had an immediate impact and we could build and get out there quickly. And so all the support sections that helped, we still had to go through all of our reviews and get statements for some of these. And then on the back end, pavement rehab, and then the construction staff that was inspecting it and managing it from that end, just to thank you, because it can be viewed as extra, but we're still delivering projects that are, they have an immediate impact to the traveling public. So I think it's overall a success, but definitely some growing pains and some lessons learned, like John said.
Yeah, I guess one other lesson to add was all of the original locations on SR1 were supposed to be night work, but then when the world got shut down by COVID, we were able to do all of those locations during the day, which made it much easier on the contractor and the construction folks. So there's a silver lining in every situation, I guess. And thanks again to Josh and his crews for the photos. And there's also videos for each one of these locations, but that would have taken way too long for this presentation. So I think that's it from us, John.
Yeah, hey, John and Brian, we have two questions for you.
Sure.
Real quick. I believe the first one was closer to the beginning of your presentation, but they're asking, how do you quantify the lump sum items, initial expenses, and MOT, et cetera?
Yeah, we made the lump sum assumptions based on the contracts or the locations that we had when we started. We also threw in a bunch of items with just token quantities that we knew we did not need initially, but that we might need. Most of that came from direction of construction, adding in different pipe sizes, different inlet boxes, junction wells. So there was a lot of stuff in the initial advertisement that was not needed for the 3 locations that were included in that contract, which ended up causing a lot of questions from the contractors during the bidding process.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. The second question here, and the last one, is the left turn signal time for the SR1 and Old Landing going to be increased with a longer LTL time? There's lots of aggressive driving out there because the folks can't seem to make the U-turn fast enough to get to that green arrow.
Yeah, so we are still going through the final design effort on that one, but I expect that we'll devote more green time to that movement and less to the other one with the double left turn. I don't know the specific, seconds that were allocated to each movement, but looking at both of those signal operations will be part of that effort. So,
okay, well, great. Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, John and Brian. All right, now it's my turn. I'm going to be presenting on an update to the revised inspection framework that we've implemented back in 2020. So like I said, the inspection framework, we called it new at the time, in March 1st, was implemented on March 1st, 2020. And it basically took away the old nomenclature of semifinal and final and replaced it with an initial and primary inspection. It also put the administering section responsible for developing the punch list. So does anybody recall what the goals of that initial inspection framework were that was issued back in March of 2020? All right, it seems like a majority of you have answered D, all the above. I think with most multiple choice tests that you have that option, it kind of piques your curiosity and you think that might be the answer, and that is the answer, all the above. Let's see if I can go forward. So that was all the above. All those had the same goals, or we had those goals. One of the highlighted priorities was the project acceptance, though. That's what we wanted to try to focus on improving. So at last year's lessons learned workshop, I presented on an overview of our progress to date, some examples of punch list, some good annotation on the initial punch list, and some items that we saw in primary inspections, some repeat items that keep showing up. And then I discussed the next steps that we would take as a department to look at the framework going forward. So since then, we looked at the data from March 2020 to February 2021. We did 123 ADA inspections. 85 of those needed corrections of some sort. They had ADA compliance issues like Mark Buckaloo was talking about earlier. And 38 of those reports were actually compliant, so we didn't have to take any other steps. And the average time it took us to have the inspection from the request was 23.5 days. And we're always trying to work on improving those numbers as well. Looking at the primary inspections, from the same time frame, we had 122. Of those 122, 53 initial punch lists were submitted with the request, which the framework requires that it be submitted. And only 7 of those 53 had an annotated initial punch list. This indicates that the item was resolved, and it shows usually documentation as to how it was resolved. Then we looked at the average duration from the primary request to the primary inspection. In the new framework that was issued in 2020, we had a transition period of 45 days for the first 6 months and then 30 days after that. So you can see that we were slightly above those goals of 52 days in the first 6 months, closer to the 30-day goal for the next 6 months. And then this past year, we actually met that goal of 30 days and we got to 28 days from the time of request to primary inspection. And we have some other data that we looked at as we evaluated the framework. This was more so looking further back before the framework was implemented, but the duration of primary inspection to the request for acceptance. So this was July 2019 to February 2021, and 215 days. That seems like quite a long time to have sitting out there some projects that are open that haven't been resolved. And then the average duration from the request for acceptance to the acceptance itself was 78 days. So some data that we looked at, along with some observational feedback that we took from various groups that we polled last year. We surveyed the administering construction groups, engineering support, DCA, and maintenance and operation, and asked a few questions and said, how can we improve this process? What would you like to see going forward? So we took that with the data and revised the framework, changed the verbiage with a lot of those same players involved. So the revised inspection framework was issued in January with an implementation date of February 1st, 2022, and the same goals still apply. So next, we're going to have a riveting good time and look at the text changes. So brace yourselves. This is going to be a great exploration in wording. So if you look at the two side by side, the orange color is March 2020. That's the initial or the framework that was issued previously. The one on the right side and with the blue background has all the yellow highlights where the text has been changed. So some of the big things that we changed were the inclusion of more active voice. We also changed some verbiage changes regarding processes and other capitalization throughout this document, but I'm going to really focus on the items that were expanded upon to clarify things. So in the first section there, we talk about the ADA inspection and that it should be held approximately 30 days prior to the initial inspection and identify any deficient items. We also discussed the use of ACIA, which is the ADA compliance inspection application, to document feasibility measurement or accessibility measurements for reporting purposes. So we'll use ACIA to report out to construction the items that are deficient. Then we also added a section below talking about the initial punch list to include these ADA items, and that the administering section will utilize ACIA to make any updates to the items that are listed. So as we correct those deficiencies, we should be utilizing ACIA to document that the number has changed, like if it's a percentage change, or take photos or provide other documentation as to why something wasn't addressed. And just move on. And we just clarified some other stuff regarding bridge management's role in the the initial inspection, as well as the requesting of the primary. So really the takeaways here, the ADA inspection should be held 30 days prior to the initial. We know that's not always practical. As an administering section, you don't want to schedule it too early, otherwise you're going to have a lot of non-compliances. Like for instance, if we request the ADA inspection before the top surface is provided at a pedestrian connection, you're going to have a vertical surface identified as, exceeding that 1/4 inch. So you should try to have all the features up to a level that we can actually perform an adequate ADA inspection. We don't want to waste too many people's time and having unnecessary non-compliance if we're not ready for it. Also, the ADA inspection is going to be documented in ACIA, which I talked about. The punch list should contain these ADA items, and that the administering section will now be using ACIA as part of the punch list annotation. So moving on to the primary inspection. Really here, the scheduling was revised. As I talked about earlier, the transition time, when we rolled this out in March of 2020, we had 45 days as we were changing our processes, and then we changed to 30 days after 6 months. So we're going to leave that at 30 days, but we also included the request for the primary inspection to include an annotated initial inspection punch list. So this is that list that has the items rectified, as well as how it was resolved and the initials of an administering section representative. So that's also in the middle of your screen there, where it talks about the annotated initial inspection punch list is to include the dates of when an item was remedied and resolved, as well as the initials of the administering section's representative responsible for the oversight of the corrective actions. We also included language that if we had supply issues, we would note that too on the annotated initial inspection punch list. So over these past 2 years, with COVID and everything, we saw some issues with the supply chain, and we realized that may hold up rectifying some of these problems. So if we note that on the request for the inspection, we'll take that into consideration and move forward as is. So the takeaways again, we're going to schedule the primary 30 days within receipt of that annotated initial inspection punch list. The annotated initial punch list includes the dates of the resolution and the initials of that administering section representative. and also indicate items that may have long lead times. So if you can't get a material to complete the work, please let us know on that annotated initial inspection punch list. And then moving on to the acceptance, we removed the word inspection at the top of the screen and added some information regarding the ADA side of this. We included the language about the ADA Title II coordinator reviewing the primary inspection report, as well as the ACIA data and the stuff that's updated by the administering section, and then issue a recommendation for acceptance to maintenance and operation, as well as engineering support. And that recommendation for acceptance should happen within 15 days of receiving the annotated primary inspection punch list. And at the very end, we just added a line about project closeout and beginning the project acceptance process. So again, I kind of just reiterated those same facts. And I know this is all you right now. I know this is a very fun topic to talk about, but I encourage you to read the framework and get familiar with it. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself and we can try to work through it. So why should we use ACIA? Well, we're capturing a lot of information when we do our inspections. And this is actually a screenshot of the DelDOT ADA inventory and assessment. This is used for our updating of the transition plan. So we're capturing this information to report on our compliance and accessibility of our pedestrian network. So you all, as administering sections, are critical in that role of turning these facilities to a compliance state. So we only had the paper forms previously, and it was very cumbersome to take all the paper into consideration and evaluate our network as a whole. So having this in the ADA inventory like this makes it a lot easier to manage and understand where our weak links are, where our disconnections are, and so forth. And just a note there, in 2021, we actually changed the compliance status or set the compliance status for 3,188 curb ramps. So those are both new curb ramps and ones that were affected by our projects that were inspected. So that's a lot of curb ramps that were brought online as part of our efforts over the past year. And we can use this data through the TSDM. This allows for better planning of projects and scoping of our future improvements. Also allows for the eventual pedestrian route planning and investigation of compliance inquiries. If a public would inquire about the status of a certain facility, we could utilize this desktop tool and visualize the location and see if there's compliance issues with that location in question. So this is the ACIA log-on screen. I just wanted to kind of walk through a few steps from the administering section's perspective. So this is the screen you'd see as a project manager. At the top, there's an inspection summary that lists the projects that will be assigned to you. You can click the View Edit button on the right side to view a particular project. So if you have a large project, it may be broken into a few different assignments. Things might have been grouped separately. So that's just what this screen's showing. And you select the View Inspection to open the assignment. So this is a list of the facilities that were inspected as part of that assignment. You can see going from the columns, we have the street or the block, the intersection, the type of facility that was inspected, the location, the cardinal direction, and the status. Did it pass or fail? There's also a way to view a map that shows all the facilities that were inspected during the ADA inspection. So looking at this row, this item has failed, so we have to go in and rectify it. So you select Review Complete to access the data. So again, this is the project manager's view. They open this up and it shows the type of facility that was inspected. There are a few fields that are in red text, And those show you that those are the features that are not compliant and need further remedy. So the project manager can then reassign the facility to the project inspector to document any corrective actions. So now at the top of the screen, you can see that it's switched to the project inspector role to type in the new values or take documentation and update ACIA. So select the perform reinspection. Have the same screen that the manager had. Again, it's in red. Make the corrections to those values. If they're the correct values, they'll change back to a blue color. And then you could use these fields on the right-hand side to add a comment, upload a document or correspondence, or even include a photo regarding the reinspection. Then you would save the features. The workflow goes back to the manager. The manager can then review the information and provide any other additional documentation or comments as necessary. Manager will then hit the submit button, and then it goes off to the ADA Title II coordinator for their review. So again, this is just the login screen. If you would like any training on ACIA or access, please contact Maria and she can get you set up. We also recently included some directions on the construction, the DelDOT construction manual wiki page under part F, e-construction. I think it's at the very bottom of the screen, part 4, I believe, which has the step-by-step the directions on how to enter the data from a project manager or inspector standpoint. So just to recap that recommendation for acceptance process that I talked about earlier, once all those facilities are re-inspected and submitted, you will request the ADA inspection by emailing dot.adasupport@delaware.gov. Include the original ADA report that was issued by engineering support. It makes it a lot more helpful for the review. The ADA section may review, request re-inspection or any additional information if necessary to verify that things have been resolved. And then when all the ADA items are addressed and they receive the annotated the annotated primary inspection punch list, they'll review it and then issue the acceptance memo. The memo is required for final acceptance to happen. So this is just the example what the final acceptance memo from Title II coordinator looks like. So here's a handy dandy flow chart. I mean, what engineer or process oriented person doesn't really love a flow chart? So I'm going to kind of briefly walk through it just to make sure that you have an idea of where we're going with this. At the top left is the start. And I just want to let you know that most of this flow chart has come from the PASS manual, the pedestrian accessibility standards, specifically chapter 5. So I took that and elaborated on it further to encompass the whole process. So once we complete our accessibility work to a level that we're ready for ADA inspection, then the administering section will request the ADA inspection. That's from engineering support. So engineering support performs the inspection, and then that information gets included on the initial inspection punch list. So these things are kind of working in parallel, but I'm going to just flow down through the ADA inspection workflow, then jump back up to the top here. So the administering section will review the comments from the inspection report. They will make any recommendation or make any changes as required or provide justification for why an issue wasn't going to be rectified. And then that gets submitted to the Title II coordinator by hitting the submit button in ACIA. Jumping back up to the workflow for the initial and primary inspections, the punch list is annotated once all the work's performed by the contractor, and that's submitted to engineering support for the request of the primary inspection. Engineering support then completes the primary inspection, and then they produce their own report and then work on other best practices. The administering section creates the punch list for the contractor. They review it internally and then submit to the contractor for them to perform the corrective actions on those primary punch list items. So once that's all completed by the contractor, the annotated primary punch list will be sent to both maintenance as well as the ADA Title II coordinator for their review. So as I talked about earlier, going down here to the bottom, the Title II coordinator is going to take the annotated primary punch list along with the ACIA report and review the information. Might be an iterative process to make sure everything's been addressed, but if there's no issues, they're going to issue a recommendation for acceptance, and that's going to kick off the project acceptance process, and then eventually the project closeout. So all that fun just to get the project closeout. So we had also had plans to update the standard specs in the fall, but something came up and we didn't pull that together, but it's planned for the spring to update the spec language to reference the initial and the primary inspection. So we're going to change the old nomenclature over to the new. And we decided to keep out the specifics of the framework, the internal process outside of the spec, because it's kind of fluid. And as we learn more lessons along the way, we may be updating it. So construction had their own view about the ADA inspection, and I think sometimes my team feels like they're Phil Connors from Groundhog Day. Sometimes we see the same things over and over again, and we'd like to go out and not have to report on any of these items. Would make all of our jobs easier, but sometimes we got to make sure that we're getting a quality product at the end of the day. Making sure that the contract's built to the requirements, as well as that we're putting a safe product out there for the traveling public. And we get it. We understand construction's very busy and often difficult. There's a lot going on. So if there's any way that we can help to educate you folks on some of the requirements, that's what we're trying to do with our inspection reports and our inspection process. So that's just, I didn't, that was a little poke at construction, from our interpretation, but we're here to help. I mean, we put out the summary reports and went the wrong way. Summary reports and other best practices that are developed in these educational opportunities, just to talk about ways that we can improve, the quality of our products. So some of those repeat offenders that we see when we go out there are the horizontal gaps Mark had alluded to earlier. If we're exceeding that ½ inch, we need to close that up. Otherwise, somebody could get stuck in that. Also, the vertical differences. If you have that greater than ½ inch of a vertical difference, that's a tripping hazard for somebody that's not in a mobility device. So we want to try to eliminate some of these items before the ADA inspection occurs. Also, things like sign protrusions and vertical clearance with vegetation. These are outside of a cane detectable range for a visually impaired pedestrian, and it's important that we have a PAR network that's accessible for all. So these are just some considerations and things that could be flagged on an ADA compliance inspection. And there's a few items on the primary inspection that keep coming up too. I know Brad specifically is going to talk about some of these tomorrow on his pre-initial inspection checklist efforts. So I won't go into too much detail, but things like the sign sleeves, we see exceeding the 4-inch maximum on a routine basis. Also, pin assembly is not installed properly for double street blades. Concrete joint spacing, sometimes there's no joints in the concrete. Inlets, they need to have steps when they're over the 4 feet. Also flow channels and the grade orientation sometimes is not correct. Things like vegetative stabilization, guardrail hardware might be missing or loose, and bituminous joint sealing. And when we have that butt joint up against the new pavement, we should have a joint seal along there. Also, the sidewalks and shared use path adjacent grading, we should be at 6:1 for 2 feet. I know it's not always practical, but that's what the detail has, and that's typically what's in the typical sections on the plans. And then utility cover access. It might not just be for the utility companies, but even the DelDOT maintenance access for manholes. So again, like I said earlier, we're trying to get to a timelier project acceptance. How can we achieve this? How can we, move the scales down a little bit? I think we saw earlier, it was like 200 and some days and 70 some days. That was back in 2019 to 2021. But we want to really reduce that effort here, or reduce that time frame here, excuse me. So if we catch more items on initial inspection, it'll help to head off some of these long punch lists, so we can eliminate those repeat offenders that we keep seeing. Also prioritize attention to operations that may have a potential to result in an ADA non-compliance. So what do I mean there? I mean that, if there's 2 operations going on that day, maybe you want to pay more attention to the one that's going to be measured with a smart level versus one that's just going to be visually inspected, like a hydroseeding operation versus placing concrete or forming up a pedestrian connection. Also, just construct per the contract documents. If something changes, have the documentation to show that, I received direction otherwise, and this is why I made the decision to not build it per the documents. There's probably an engineering judgment that was involved, and if there was a decision that's documented, it's very valuable to have. If something doesn't seem right, ask the question. I think most groups realize that if a project or a problem comes up in construction, I think you drop everything, you answer that. So designers, engineering support, traffic section, if a question comes up, reach out to those groups, and usually that becomes a top priority. And just lastly, we did a lot of inspections last year. There was 146 ADA inspections, 130 primary inspections. As Shante mentioned earlier, with the infrastructure bill on the horizon, I think there's more work coming our way. So, if we could just try to head off some of these repeat items, it might help to improve project acceptance. So reduce the length of those lists will end up speeding up the report development, allow us for faster scheduling of your projects for inspection, and then ultimately result in faster acceptance and project closeout. And so with that, that's all I had. Sure. And I don't see any questions at this time, but I'm here all day, so feel free to send them in the chat and I'll answer them. Okay. So Dan Thompson, DelDOT Traffic Safety Officer, and Carrie Yost, DelDOT Assistant Traffic Safety Programs Manager, will be presenting on some work zone common issues and other considerations for work hours on our contracts.
All right, thanks, John. Do you hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I'll go ahead and get started. Like John said, I'm Dan Thompson. I'm the South District Safety Officer. So I'm going to go over some maintenance of traffic, common issues, things that we've learned. If you guys were on the utility summit a couple of weeks ago, it's pretty much the same presentation. So some of it might sound like it's geared towards utility companies, but it applies towards more than just them. Some of the things we're going to go over is coordination, notification, subcontractors and Delaware guidelines, considerations for MOT providers and MOT subcontractors. We'll go over some frequently seen errors. Got a couple slides on pedestrian issues. We seem to be hammering on the pedestrian stuff today. And then at the end, I'll have a spot where you guys can ask some questions if you want. All right, so coordination. So what needs to happen with coordination? So prior to the utility permit submission, so if there's any questions about MOT, it doesn't have to be a utility permit, any kind of MOT coordination, please reach out to us, Traffic Safety. We're not trying to hold things up. I know it might seem like that, but we're here to work with you, work through it, and we'd rather hit it right off the bat and get everything done so there's no hiccups in the plan approval or utility approval process. So prior to capital or advanced relocations, so these will have a set of approved plans. So any changes or modifications that need to be coordinated with traffic safety and the construction staff. And these projects will be subject to pretty much the same time restrictions as the main project. So anything that goes out for advanced utilities has to follow those same guidelines or that matrix that's in those plans. So the utility contractor needs to make sure that they get out and that those are referenced to them before the work begins. And then they also, everybody needs to coordinate with adjacent projects, any road work, construction, or MOT working in the same area. They all need to coordinate and make sure that things aren't overlapped or in conflict with the Delaware MUTCD. Again, we can come out and help you guys out with that too. So the next slide is going to be about notification. So any work within the state right away, the TMC needs to be notified of daily activities, when they're set up, when they're removed, what might be left at the end of the day. The phone number's there. And then also the utility section, public works, capital, all their inspection staff, any inspectors that are out there during the day need to be notified of, what's going on. And then all of our traffic safety personnel is listed on the side here. So we've had a couple new guys, so all their contacts there. All right, so subcontractor issues. So some of the issues that we've seen are there's some subcontractors that come from out of state that aren't familiar with Delaware standards. We need to make sure that they're familiar with the Delaware MUTCD, our contract guidelines and the time restrictions. They'll come out and, hey, this is what we do in Maryland, this is what we do in Pennsylvania, those kind of things. We need to make sure that they're educated on what they need to be doing in Delaware. Field issue resolution. So when we go out in the field, we need to know who the point of contact is. They like to play the blame game a lot. If they're a subcontractor for the GC and they're from out of state, it's they didn't tell me, or I didn't get that information. So make sure that everybody in the field is coordinated with that. And then we need to make sure that that person is the one who can actually make the change. We run into that quite often. So some considerations for MOT subcontractors. So these would be contractors that work in the state, some out of the state, but they're familiar with our MOT setups. There needs to be an information exchange. So the contractor needs to make sure to let the MOT sub know of the operational needs. If they're going to be doing a lane closure, if they're going to be doing a shoulder closure, if things are going to be moving. A lot of work zones are fluid. So they need to make sure that they show up with the proper equipment to do it. Contractor like to keep on working, but we need to make sure that the MOT is set up correctly, even if they're moving around or changing their setup. So the responsibility for all that, it ultimately falls on the permit holder or the general contractor. So whether it's their sub or whoever's doing the work for them, it ultimately falls to them. So we want to make sure that all the information is to the right people. They know what they need to be doing. So we're not holding up process and things are still safe out there. So just to go over some frequently seen errors, there's issues with work zone coordination, like I talked about a little bit earlier. So overlapping signage. You think that this could have been avoided, or is this just the smallest work zone in the state? Could have been pretty easily rectified by taking down a sign. Some errors that we see with flaggers. A lot of the times we'll go out there and there's flaggers that aren't certified in Delaware. They may have the ATSA certification, but they need to make sure that they have the Delaware certification on their card. Some states allow just the federal standard, whereas we don't. We have some state specific guidelines when it comes to flagging. And they need to be certified through a program such as ATSA, but they need to be certified in Delaware. So frequently seen errors that we see on signage. So incorrect sign heights on temporary signs. There's a picture there of a sign that's a little too short. The standard for a temporary sign is 5 foot from the bottom of the sign to the top of the road surface. And for a permanent, it's 7 foot. Some of the other issues we see is incorrect sign spacing on the roadway for the typical application. I'll have another slide in here that has a chart that'll show you how far signs are supposed to be spaced apart based on the type of roadway. And then another big one is we see signs being stored in the right of way all over the place when they're not in use. They need to be either removed or placed behind positive protection, because that can become a hazard to an errant vehicle that's running off the road. Some more frequently seen errors. So like for on devices, a lot of times they'll be damaged, dirty, and that'll make them non-compliant. If they're not reflective, if they're not bright, we're going to ask that they be replaced. We follow the asset quality guidelines that they put out a pamphlet and a brochure, and it gives you examples of what's good, what's bad, and what's marginal. That's what we use to go off of for this. We also see incorrect sign spacing on devices. It's typically based on the speedway, on the speed limit of the roadway. You can see in the second picture at the top, it's Route 1 down the Rehoboth area. They've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 drums closing 2 lanes of traffic. And that's also the incorrect length for the tapers, and that's what we see a lot of too. So incorrect taper length and the spacing. So it's based on the setup or the shift or the closure and the roadway and the width of the shifted area. So it might sound a little complicated, but the Delaware MUTCD has all the charts and all the breakdowns in it, which are right here. So on the left-hand side is a typical lane closure on a multi-lane highway, something that you'd see on Route 1, on 13, something along those lines. The one on the right-hand side is a typical lane closure on a 2-lane roadway. You've got your taper length criteria there in the middle, and then you've got your sign spacing at the bottom. So it might sound a little complicated, but it's not. And we want to make sure that everybody out in the field references all these. So some specific MOT that we see a lot of would be like a rolling roadblock. So there's only special cases where we would use this. It's mostly seen for like aerial crossings on major roadways. We don't allow lines to be moved over live traffic. So that's where we're going to see this mostly. So prior to an event like this going on, that needs to be coordinated with traffic safety and construction, so we can figure out timing and make sure that everything that's needed is going to be out there on site. So to hit on the pedestrian issues, we treat pedestrians the same way as we do a vehicle. So if there are facilities on the site, they need to be maintained if they're going to be blocked. It's important to know the area that you're working in, because it can be a little tricky if you're working down in the beach area where there's pedestrian facilities on one side, not on the other. There's different ways that we can come up with working around that. We can use a pedestrian detour. If they're taken away from the sidewalk, you have to use a approved material and specialized devices to delineate them. You can build a path around your work zone. You just have to make sure that it's material that's approved for use for that. And then in some cases, we can use pedestrian flagging. If you're going to only be working for the day and everything's going to be closed back up at night, pedestrian flagging is a much better and easier option to use. We do have specific MOT for pedestrians and bikes. Down in the Dewey area, we have a shoulder, which is actually a bike lane and a pedestrian lane. In those situations, we had to come up with some creative MOT. So this involves closing a lane of traffic and placing the bikes and peds into that closed lane and channelizing them with specific signage. This way, even if they're only working in a shoulder, those peds and those bikes have to still be accommodated for. So we're going to have to close the lane. So that needs to come into consideration when you're thinking about lane closure hours or things of that nature, because of the type of lane that it is. It's not just a shoulder. And then pedestrians and bikes must be maintained. So once the MOT is in place, it must remain unobstructed and open to, it's got to be open to traffic, just like a normal lane would be. So if you're parking a TMA or you have a bucket truck or a piece of equipment that you're parking in that lane, that's not what it's for. It's there to accommodate that lane that you're already closing. To briefly hit on the detour and design approval. So detours must be submitted to traffic safety for review and approval. They have to be on our border with our legend. They must be signed and sealed by an engineer. They need to be added to the UPA, or they need to be added into the plan set. And the project manager will need to submit a road closure form along with the signed detour to the TMC for notification. So once all of that is been done and everything has been submitted, we can go in traffic safety and approve that road closure. So all that information is blasted out. If you have any questions for detours or you need to know who to submit them to, it would be David Wynn in our section, and his contact is right here. And with that, I don't know if there's any questions or not, but that would be my portion of the MOT here. Carrie Yost is going to take over and handle the next section.
Thanks, Dan. Just waiting for presentation to come up. All right, so today I'm going to touch on allowable work hours. So a quick overview. Today I want to touch on what are the allowable work hours, why do we use them, how are they determined, and then a few specific topics I was asked to touch on. So what do we do when our allowable work hours don't really allow for the work that we need to get done? So essentially, how do we modify the allowable work hours on the fly? Specifically, there's some questions about nighttime hours and how those, why are they sometimes allowed for allowable work hours? Why are we sometimes not allowed to work at night? So what happens when we don't follow the allowable work hours? Who's looking for it? And what are our tools in the toolbox to try to get us back on track? Lastly, I'll give you the contact information for the representatives in traffic safety if you guys have any questions or need assistance. So the important takeaway for allowable work hours, these are a time restriction on when we can close lanes. So we are trying to mitigate the impacts to the traveling public. When we, close lanes, we're going to effectively reduce the capacity of the road. So typically we want to avoid the busiest times on the roadway. In Delaware, as in most other transportation facilities, that's going to be your AM and your PM peak periods. So typically that's going to be, say, 7 to 9 AM and 3 to 6 PM. So usually, historically, the typical allowable work hours are the period between the AM and PM peaks, so your 9 AM to 3 PM hours. We also are typically able to consider overnight hours, so that'll be something like 6 PM to 6 AM, and tentatively work can be done over the weekend. We've pretty frequently we'll do something along the lines of like 6 PM on Friday, contractor can work straight through until 6 AM on Monday. Other things to consider: seasonal traffic. Traffic down toward the beaches is very directional. It's very heavy in the southbound direction on a Friday. In the summer, very heavy in the northbound direction on a Sunday, Monday. Also, we may be able to permit additional hours. For example, if schools are out of session or during the summer months, or we might avoid specific hours, if the project is in close proximity to a school, or we know we're going to have conflicts with school buses. So ultimately, the concept of defining what these allowable work hours are going to be, they are a planned disruption. So we're going to pick the hours that we can best tolerate the reduction in roadway capacity. So this slide shows some examples of our lane closure tables that are frequently either we work together with the engineers or the engineers propose these and then we give some feedback, or one way or another, we're developing these based on data. So starting with the one towards the left side of the slide, this is just the simplest. It's just one table. This is showing your allowable lane closure in the darker shade. So you can see the way to read this table is during the weekdays from 7 AM to 8 PM, no lane closures are allowed. However, 8 PM until 7 AM, the contractor can close a lane. During the weekends, there are a little bit more allowable. So on Saturdays and Sundays, the contractor can close the lane at 6 AM and keep it closed up until 10 AM. So we'll get into it a little deeper as to the traffic volumes that really define why are you allowed to open a little bit longer for these two weekends versus weekdays. This one in the middle is an example of summer versus non-summer. I believe this was a Route 1 example. So you can see in the non-summer, there's a lot more allowable work hours, or a lot more lane closure permitted hours. And then on the summer lane, the summer period, we have a lot less hours allowed. Over here on the right side is all for one specific project. And this is just to show that it can get much more complicated depending on the cross section of the roadway. So this project actually was for, it's on Route 13, where we have multiple different cross sections, where we have an 8-lane section, we have a 6-lane section, we have a 4-lane section, and the project spans all of those. So we looked at those individually and we were able to put together allowable lane closure hours. Obviously in the 4-lane section, we're only going to close 1 lane in each direction at a time. That's all that's permissible. However, in the 8-lane section, there's specific hours. These, it's kind of hard to see, but these darker hours, you can close 3 lanes, in the middle of the night on 13. These medium shaded ones, you can close 2 lanes out of the 4 lanes for each direction. These lighter shaded ones, 1 lane. But during, this will be towards your PM peak for this direction of travel, AM peak for this direction of travel. We need all of our lanes open. So why do we use allowable lane closure or allowable work hours? We need to reduce the roadway capacity, or we want to reduce the roadway capacity so we can facilitate doing work within the travel lanes or immediately adjacent to the travel lanes. So anytime it's pretty simple. Anytime that our traffic volume is going to exceed the capacity, we're going to have congestion. There's going to be backups. There's going to be delays. People are going to notice that their commute is delayed versus whatever their normal travel time is. So when we close lanes, it also does tend to push some traffic to the surrounding roadways. Drivers are going to seek their alternate routes. And this may result in complaints and disturbances. People are going to seek cut-through routes, potentially through neighborhoods or other low classification roadways. So we also note that when we do close lanes, traffic typically when it does back up and get congested, certain types of crash frequency will tend to increase. So in specifically our rear end type crashes. So how do we determine, or how do we work with the engineers to determine what the allowable work hours are going to be? So we have traffic data available from a variety of sources. We have a very strong network of traffic monitoring and traffic counting equipment, whether they be automatic count stations or even our loop detectors on our existing traffic signals. So we're able to pull that data and quantify on an hour-by-hour basis what is the hourly traffic for that roadway facility. And then based on the lane capacity for that facility, we can determine if we close this lane during this hour, we're going to be either over or under capacity. It's really just that simple. On our lower volume roadways where we don't actually have active monitoring equipment, we could set a temporary solution such as a tube counter or an automated video counting solution. We also have the traffic summary book that planning maintains, and using that resource, it's not an exact science, but we can take the ADT from the traffic summary book, and then we have data called the diurnal distribution, and you can break down, we expect 5.3% of the ADT to be during this hour. So we can break it down on a 24-hour basis and then determine our allowable work hours based on those numbers. So another important thing to note, so for open-ended projects, daily maintenance activities, data gathering, sampling, bridge inspections, and land surveying, DelDOT does have a document. It's Policy Implement C-09, and this defines typical time restrictions on roadways with specific features. So there's lots of notes. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It is important to note, though, that it is heavily based on the ADT. So, for example, a roadway with less than 1,000 ADT, we're not going to have specific work hour restrictions. Your 1,000 to 8,000, it's going to restrict no work from 6 to 8, 4 to 7, anything over 8,000. expands those a little bit to 6 to 9 and 3 to 8. Those are going to be bare minimum. And again, those are not for capital projects or these are for, your open-ended, your daily maintenance, etc. If in doubt, reach out to traffic safety and we'll work with you guys. So real quick, I just want to go through a very simple, this one's a simple example. So based on the work zone safety and mobility guidelines, which is the figure in the bottom right of the slide, for this particular highway, Route 7, we were proposing a reduction from 2 lanes down to 1 lane. So we interpret that the work zone capacity is 1,340 vehicles. We charted the hour-by-hour volume, and we just put in the threshold. Based on this figure, we can see that our proposed traffic is not going to exceed a single lane of traffic capacity. Therefore, our allowable lane closure matrix is all hours are permitted. This is just a really easy example. In this particular case, we actually backtracked and changed our requirement to only be a type A TMP, which therefore was, just the traffic control plans. So another example, this is for a flagging operation. And some people, a lot of times we forget that a flagging operation is a lane closure. In most scenarios, say you have a two-way, 2-lane roadway, we're going to close 1 lane. We are able to, calculate, what are the impacts. We can analyze what hours should be allowable work hours, to permit that flagging operation. So this process it's a little more labor intensive to come up with this, but in a nutshell, you have to play with a few different variables. We have a spreadsheet that, one of our excellent consulting firms was put together for us several years ago, and you modify factors such as what is the cycle length. So is from the amount of time that the one flagger, turns his paddle to slow until, he stops it, the other flagger goes, and then it goes back to the original flagger. You also have to define, what is the length of your work zone. That's significantly going to impact your calculation for allowable time for your flagging operation, because the longer your work zone, the longer it takes to clear all those vehicles out. So, and then, like I said, you're going to calibrate this. You have to plug and chug these numbers on an hourly basis. And essentially what we're looking for is the point where the queues are dissipating. If the queues are growing exponentially, or there's no way in that hour based on those values, the queues are just going to keep accumulating. That's not an allowable work hour. And then even on the edge of those allowable work hours, there's going to be some periods where, yes, in theory, we can get the flagging operation to work within these acceptable times. But there could be up to 10 minutes of delay. So we work out those numbers in these spreadsheets, and that's, what allows us to provide an allowable single lane closure for this particular facility. So these next couple slides are specific questions we have. If the work that we need to do is going to take longer than the allowable work hours, first off, talk to traffic safety. We may be able to pull some updated traffic data. We may be able to examine, how far over the threshold are we? Are we able to tolerate? If traffic's only 5 or 10% over capacity, and it's only going to result in a 2 to 3 minutes of additional delay. As long as we consciously make that decision, that's fine. However, if we reduce, let's say we allow the entire midday period, and those queues accumulate, and by the time we get to the PM peak hour, we've got an hour of delay added to that corridor because of the congestion that we've accrued. So there are other strategies, to mitigate that congestion that we may be able to look at. There are other options too, that if we do know that, it's based on the severity or the urgency of the work, the high profile of the project, we can request approval from the executive management team. So, for example, anytime we want to do lane closures on or around the I-95 viaduct project, there is a formal process, to get those requests and approvals up the chain right now. So, and then that you also can use an incentive or disincentive to motivate the contractor. Hey, we're going to give you these hours, but if you don't get it done in time, this is going to be your penalty, or vice versa. If you do get it done in time, here is your incentive. So to touch on nighttime hours, it's a pretty safe assumption that just about every transportation facility in the state, the traffic volume is going to be lower during the overnight hours. However, based on disturbance to the surrounding properties, we are frequently tasked with reducing those allowable work hours. So the project team can consider two different tools in the toolbox, either being a night survey to get the feedback from the impacted residents, or they can conduct a noise study. Traffic safety, we look at the traffic volumes, and our requirement is typically going to be that we try not to require nighttime work, but some facilities that is the requirement, that the congestion would just be so high that we really don't have any other option. And also just worth mentioning, there is a new note to go on the plan sheets, and essentially it just outlines that the contractor, if they choose to modify the MOT construction phasing per the plan set, they need to do their night survey or their noise study if they do wish to work at night, if that wasn't how the project was originally planned out. So when the allowable work hours are not followed, first and foremost, please coordinate with traffic safety, with the Transportation Management Center, the TMC. So our team, we're out and about on the roads every day. We're looking at the projects. We're coordinating, directly with the project manager, the inspectors. If we do know, that a project is, the contractors on the road earlier than they're supposed to be, or vice versa, contractors on the road later than they're supposed to be, we're probably going to watch that project a lot closer. You're going to have traffic safety out there much more frequently, until we're on the same page. And that's it's not so much that we're just trying to nail you guys. It's that we want to be able to monitor that and essentially mitigate those concerns as soon as possible. We are potentially open to unique situations. If we only permitted, say, a 5-hour window for an overnight lane closure, but the contractor presents, I need 8 hours to do this particular aspect of my construction, then we certainly we can crunch the numbers and see, again, what are the hours that are going to be best to do that. So we're really trying to avoid complaints from the public, from the legislators. They call in either to their legislators, and then it comes into the higher ups, or complaints go directly into the TMC. So ultimately, the better we can communicate what our allowable work hours, give everyone fair expectations. So it's also worth mentioning that if there is a crash or a major incident within the work zone, and the contractor was found to be outside of their allowable work hours, then we may have to have the higher ups get involved, and determine what is the best path forward, because then in theory someone is liable. And traffic safety, we're just trying to mitigate these as best as we can. And then I did mention on the prior slide is one of the we do have a tool in the toolbox to disincentivize the contractors via liquidated damages. So if they are not off the road by a certain time period per the contract documents, they can be assessed liquidated damages on a 15-minute basis, and every 15 minutes after that they are charged an additional cost. So if anybody has any questions about anything I talked about today, you need to change your allowable work hours on the fly, your project's in design, and you want to go over what are the options to do this particular work that I need to get done in this particular time period. It's a great idea to work first with the traffic safety officer for that particular district. We do have 4 safety officers right now for North Canal, Central, and South. We are still filling our vacant statewide position. As Dan had mentioned before, David Wynn is our traffic safety engineer, and he coordinates the plan review process, the detour reviews, things like that. So he's an excellent resource. And then you also have myself and Jerry Najiski, our chief safety officer. So feel free to reach out to any of us if anybody has any more questions. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Carrie and Dan. I don't see any questions at this time, but I think they provided all their contact information. If you have one, please reach out to them. So our last presentation of the day will focus on the ES2M wiki. Vince Davis, water resource engineer, has been developing a wiki page with various stormwater, drainage, and erosion and sediment control guidance.
Alrighty. Can you hear me okay, John?
Yes, sir.
Alrighty. So for the ES2M wiki page, which ES2M stands for Erosion, Sediment, and Stormwater Management, this basically started with a design guide that was actually developed by Rob McCleary and Sal Palele back in the 90s. It's gone over a couple updates since then, and of course everything goes online now. And now we're at the point of our own ES2M wiki page. Oh, the slide's not working. Next slide. There you go. So the main headings that we have, as you can see there on the left, we're constantly updating our wiki page. A lot of those headings already has information under that. It's mostly geared towards design. It's also, there's a maintenance section in there, as well as some maintenance folks obviously have some other sections in there that could be useful. Even our construction folks and pretty much anybody else that, as I like to say, is kind of into the water nerdy thing. There's all kinds of great information in here for that. Next slide. And I'm just going to highlight some of the things under those headings. We have an ENS design guide. So a lot of the design guidances are based on, I try to approach it from the sense of, I'm a brand new engineer out of college. My project manager dumped a project on me, said, design this, and walked away. What do I do? So for the ENS design guide, it really takes you step by step on how to look at ENS and design ENS for a whole project. Obviously, we have some formulas that the engineers get to nerd out on a little bit. And then also, for example, like for silt fence, reinforced silt fence, super silt fence, at what point do I use one over the other? So as you go through that ENS design guide, it does a good job of explaining everything, when to use it, when not to use it, what it's for, and all that good stuff. And also, FYI, some people are aware of it. Once you disturb more than 20 acres, then you, as per the Delaware sediment and stormwater regulations, you have to design the ENS for that project based on a 2-year storm bare earth condition for the amount of runoff. Next slide. So for the project level DERM, that's an example problem is currently being developed. That should be up pretty soon. That'll go through the whole steps of how to do what we call the PLD. Basically, that's your debit of what your project is going to have that you would owe from like a stormwater quality aspect. In our hydraulics section, I kind of came up with I call it a hydraulic review and basic pipe sizing design aid. So if you had, for example, like a driveway culvert or a really simple pipe to put in, I have a process in there that just makes it a lot easier. Then for the hydraulic review, if you had to look at some plans and kind of make a quick decision on whether that pipe system would probably work or not, it's a really quick way of checking that type of system. And then under hydrology, the watershed delineation and runoff analysis, it goes through the whole aspects of how you do a watershed delineation, how you determine the amount of runoff. And then of course, CV and FE compliance, which under the reg language is basically that you're how to attain compliance for your 10-year and 100-year storm events. Next. We have the channel lining selection chart, which again, don't have to run any calcs. You can just look up the depth of your design storm event, and then whatever slope, for example, that channel is on, and you can just find right away whether you need an ECB, a TRM type 1, TRM type 2, or maybe even potentially riprap. For the pipe outfall design and scour protection, that is for pipe outfalls only that aren't considered a bridge. Because once you get into a pipe or a culvert that's falls under definition of being a bridge, then you need to work with the bridge design section. This was actually a pretty interesting project. I actually had an article that was published in a magazine based on this research that I had done. One thing that I'm proposing is to start with start potentially having a non-riprap option, because that can be a lot better for maintenance and homeowners, so you don't have to go out and spray herbicides everywhere. Plus, it'd be a lot easier to keep the vegetation maintained. And one of the interesting facts is that I don't think anybody in DelDOT, at least from what I found, pretty much designs their riprap outfalls the same way. Some people might use HEC 14. Some people use those NRCS graphs or with all the curves and everything on it. And one interesting thing about the NRCS graphs is they were developed probably in the 70s or 80s. And I contacted the NRCS folks out in Colorado, who's supposed to be, that falls under their purview, as well as the NRCS National Hydraulic Engineer. And nobody can tell me where those graphs came from, how they were developed, what formulas they're based on. So part of it is it's probably like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because if it works, it works. So through the pipe outfall design, I tried to take combinations of a lot of research I did from throughout the whole US on how different states, counties, municipalities do their design. So hopefully I've come up with an easier method to do either the non-riprap, the riprap apron, or what we call the energy dissipator, which we have a standard construction detail for. And hopefully have broken it down easy enough that it would make calculating that a lot easier. And also at which point do you use which outfall protection. Next. For the model stormwater management plan sheets, I'm not sure if we have a link to the DRC up yet, but I mean, that's pretty much what it would go to. One thing we do have right now that's in addition is a 4-base spillway detail. You can see that there at the bottom. So that's under this wiki page. And also just recently, we're going to have an inspection port detail update. And that relates to how we have to do post-construction infiltration testing, which is what we're required to do under the regulations. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. And those inspection ports are basically just for infiltration trenches, and also for if you have a bioretention area that has infiltration. Under the facility sequence of construction, we currently have 5 facility sequences, and basically those are guides that if you just copy and paste those, it might work, but really every location is kind of has a particular way or might have some different circumstances where those sequences should be changed for that particular facility wherever it's located. Next. This is a pretty big one, this stormwater facility design guidance. Right now, we currently have the 3 facilities shown, the infiltration trench, wet pond, bioretention. Trying to add in a couple more as later as so we can get those done. These design guidances take you literally from, again, that project manager that says design this and walks away to right through the very end. And it's all done with, basically done with HydroCAD. Every single step is labeled out. It has little red arrows to show you which boxes to check. So it should be a really good guidance document to help you get from A to B, because that's something we've never really had. It's usually, I know, in the design sections, well, get whoever did the last design and get up with them and see how they did it. Because a lot of times, even if you have designed one of these type facilities, you might not design another one for 2 or 3 years. And there's definitely can be a lot of information that's either forgotten or not, quote, not remembered. Next. We also have the downloadable form to fill out for the facility number request. That'll be a specific number assigned to a facility because as in all the facilities that DelDOT owns, we have to maintain them forever. So when it gets through construction, gets through final acceptance, and then it gets turned over to our MPDS group, who again will have to maintain these facilities forever. They do yearly, and I think sometimes every 2-year inspections, depending on the facilities. So they're constantly getting checked and maintained. The stormwater report format, just like it sounds, it lays out everything you need to how to do your stormwater management report for a project. Standard plan documentation gives a quick definition of what's a standard plan versus a detailed plan. And that's all from the Delaware Sediment and Stormwater regs on that verbiage of standard plan, detailed plan. And then we have downloadable forms that can be filled out for if you do have a standard plan project. Next. For the maintenance, I labeled this as maintenance only because I kind of did it as you could, I would describe it as kind of like a down and dirty stream diversion. It's something that I don't think we necessarily want our contractors to really do, because these stream diversions are really not made for long term. As you can imagine, if our maintenance forces needs to go out and replace a pipe somewhere, and they have either a small stream or the potential for runoff from a rainstorm coming through, you want to be able to keep that area dry while you're replacing that pipe or culvert. So I get into a whole modified version of how that can be done. Also have, if they need to figure out a quantity for in the stream flow, I've actually developed an Excel sheet where all they have to do is fill in a few numbers, and you can figure out right away what's the flow rate in CFS as well as in gallons per minute, because then that can help decide which size pump you might need. There's also a whole discussion on all the different pumps and how to pick a different pump for whatever you need. And then we also have a flow chart, just like John had mentioned before. We love our flow charts. So for our maintenance folks, because maintenance activities under the probably second or third version of old regs used to all fall under what was called a waiver. Well, under the latest regs that started in February of 2019, there's no such thing as waivers or variances anymore. And one thing when we got our redelegation under DENREC was that our maintenance activities need to basically start following the same E&S that we do for all our projects. So that could be as simple as, hey, we just do a standard plan form and we go with that, or we might have to do more of a detailed plan where we're actually showing all the different E&S items. So if you follow this flow chart, it'll kind of tell you right what we need when we need it. Next. Future editions forthcoming, the facility design tables. If you look in the current DENREC BMP manual, that they have design tables that get down to like the quick and dirty of what you need for different facilities. Some kind of DelDOT ISing knows that's currently in production. Hopefully that should be up soon. Also have a downstream analysis example based on more of a DelDOT project, because the one that DENREC shows on our site is for a developer project. More CV and FE compliance documentation forthcoming to hopefully help make that easier. Probably do an explanation, because I know some folks are a little intimidated by something like HydroCAD. So I was thinking probably doing up a explanation of the different options for when you can pick for like whether it's runoff, reach routing, pond routing methods in HydroCAD. I know a lot of folks have heard about the road design manuals. In essence, basically going to become like a 6-page sheet of just links to everything else. Of course, for drainage, that's be a little bit tougher, because drainage really falls under more state purviews of, for example, like how much spread you allow and depths of flow as compared to like how close to like a roadside edge. So probably it's in the works right now. It's in the very beginning works of kind of redoing chapter 6 of the road design manual and redoing that and put it under the ES2M wiki page. And then another thing we're working on with DENREC at the moment is putting the CCR course online. What was known as the Blue Card course, that's already online. So you can go on and take that at any time. And then for the CCR course, we're looking to get that online by the beginning of next year. And then, of course, if you have any specific requests concerning stormwater management, E&S, or drainage that you would like to see on the wiki page, by all means, contact me and we'll try to do our best to get that done. Thank you.
Next slide.
And one of our first questions, do you feel the wiki page information will be useful for your current position? Well, it looks like it'll be useful for quite a few people. I guess we can probably discount traffic. And would you be interested in having some training sessions on all of this different material? And for the training sessions, I would imagine that we would try to break that up into maybe like 2-hour segments and just kind of almost like a lunch and learn, a little bit more than that, although you'd have to provide your own lunch. Alrighty, sounds great.
Hey, Vince, this is Bob. We have one question for you.
Bring it.
Can the inspection ports be within the clear zone?
That's always interesting, because a lot of times your facility, depending on what the facility is, it's probably not going to be in the clear zone anyway, especially when you're dealing with infiltration trenches and you have all that loose stone on top. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe we have any within a clear zone, or if we do, it's got to be very, very few facilities. And those inspection ports are going to be within the facilities, not necessarily like right next to the road edge.
Okay, all right then. Thanks, Vince. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Vince. And the other question that was asked was just, can you provide the link to the wiki page? And I put that in the chat in the Q&A, so people can find that. All right, so thank you to Vince and to all of today's presenters. We'd like to thank our audience for their participation in the Q&A as well as the polling throughout today's presentations. As you can see on the screen, we have the agenda for tomorrow. We're starting at 8 a.m. And there will be a link provided shortly for that if it hasn't already been provided for tomorrow's session. And for those that are not able to attend tomorrow, there will be a PDH or an evaluation sent out after tomorrow's session. And if you want your PDH certificate, you'll have to complete that by close of business on March 11th. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you again and have a good night and get out there and enjoy this nice weather for, a normal March day. So we're feeling the heat in here anyway. All right, see you all later.